I just realized that nobody actually talked about Nobody 2. And you would think that they would because the first movie was indeed pretty good and, as far as I know, was pretty well received. I've seen far more obscure movies just randomly pop up in my feed because suddenly everybody is reviewing them, but somehow Nobody 2 stayed relatively ignored by the masses. For the majority of the movie, I've really liked my experience. There were some elements that were a bit frustrating, but honestly, most of the movie was exactly what you expected. Actually, the movie was more or less almost beat for beat a repeat of what happened in the first outing. My only real issue was that there was some kind of, let's say, hypocrisy when it comes to the teaming and the reaction of the characters. My problem was that the characters, well, the family, developed a hatred for the main character, the husband, played by Bob Odenkirk. He went from being a pushover, who was always there for his family, but was working a mediocre desk job, and again was a pushover and just let things happen. He always went for the route of least resistance. But now he spends most of his days violently murdering people, and somehow his family doesn't respect him for that. I understand that you don't want in life to go from one extreme to another, being a overly present dad but that's too soft, to being an absent dad that's really violent. But the problem was that the critique that his family had was especially that, him being soft. And everybody liked when he showed the capacity for violence, the capacity to get shit done and protect his family. Somehow, now that's being ignored and his violent tendencies count suddenly for nothing. The fact that he's this badass CIA agent, okay, well, there's, you can't really be cool when you're fed, but he's this essentially John Wick James Bond, and suddenly no one in the family cares for that. And that brings us to the main theme of the movie, and where I started hating my experience with it, because it falls apart in the last 15 to 20 minutes. So in the last 15 minutes of the movie, it's where everything falls apart. And the main theme of the movie, and I will be really specific with it, is that violence is bad and you should not defend yourself, but specifically, you should not defend yourself if you're a white man. It's important when you consume a piece of media to not simply consume the media, but you have to see the subtext behind the media. For example, with Inglourious Basterds, nobody accused Quentin Tarantino of being a Nazi because most of those characters die horrible, violent deaths, and they're clearly treated as an antagonistic force. So we can assume through what happens to them in the story that Quentin Tarantino is clearly on the side of America. Because it's not just a problem that the main character uses violence, it's also bad that his son uses violence too. And it's really egregious and stupid when you think about it, because you'll have the character of the RZA cutting a man's head in half, starting from the mouth as if it was a Mortal Kombat finisher, and then the very next shot congratulate the son because he spared the life of a guy that was willing not only to kill him, his new best friend, and his little sister. The guy was ready to kill fucking kids, but somehow sparing him is a good thing. Meanwhile, everyone else around him suddenly becomes fucking John Wick and goes on a murder spree. The idea is that the next generation should learn to resolve every conflict peacefully and not fight. And honestly, that's just stupid. If life was that easy, we wouldn't have conflict. There are people out there, or they wear faces, but they're people, but they're not human. And they're ready for violence. They choose violence every day they wake up. And you have to fight back sometimes. And I'm not advocating for anything, but the naive idiots who usually advocate for that kind of mindset are people who live in fancy gated neighborhoods where they're always one call away from the police, and you know the police is going to arrive in their neighborhood sooner than in yours. With that mindset in mind, well, police officers should not have guns. They also should not have batons. Actually, there shouldn't be any police officers. When you have a violent immigrant coming into your house, you should just talk him down and everything will be solved. Being inoffensive is not a virtue, and it is incredible how Western society is now walking into its own grave because of what I can only call suicidal empathy. Which leads me to my next point. The protagonist in the last 15 minutes, despite the fact that he was fighting 6 armed men at a time and he was overpowering people twice his size, he suddenly gets overpowered by 2 probably lesbian women and loses and has to be saved by his wife. This is a Superman kind of energy. At the very least with this movie, and where I got baited, was that he was kicking ass for most of it, and I don't mind my protagonist losing. You have instances in John Wick where John gets his ass beat, and in the last Mission Impossible, Ethan gets his ass beat, but most of the time it makes sense. In the case of John Wick, he was fighting a girl with a knife in the second movie, and in Mission Impossible, he was fighting not only a woman, played by Paul Clementieff, but he was also fighting a guy at the same time in a narrow hallway, and they also had weapons. It's actually possible for men to win against multiple opponents, assuming that they have no combat experience, and that they are not armed, and that you keep your distances. Any other such case becomes fantasy. I could believe it a little bit more in John Wick because Keanu Reeves actually took extensive training in firearms, jiu-jitsu, and I think sambo. In this case, I believe it a little bit less, but okay, he's a super trained, fed, whatever. But you're not gonna make me forget that women and men are both human, but they're not built exactly the same. They're dimorphic. Men have, on average, 60 to 70% more strength in the lower body and 40 to 60% in the upper body. I've seen varying numbers, but from what I've gathered and what can be seen obviously in real life is that men are on average much stronger, especially in the upper body, and that gap is not as big in the lower body, which makes sense because legs are usually strong and are more developed than your upper body in general. Now, a lot of people will say, well, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is that you can put things that are unlike reality. A work of fiction is not good because it follows reality, but with every work of fiction, you have to add a context in order to justify why characters have certain abilities. That's why a lot of movies, superhero movies, will have an origin story. You need to know where the character comes from, how they acquired their powers, were they born with it. You wouldn't watch a Martin Scorsese movie and suddenly see a guy fly and think that's normal. You think, well, everything was normal up to that point, why can that guy fly? What is the justification? Everything needs to be set up in advance. I don't mind Wonder Woman because she's literally the daughter of Greek gods, so that's fine. But you can't show me normal, average-sized women and have them overpower a guy that has been shown to be much more competent than the average man. It's just quite ridiculous. And my problem with propaganda is that there's an effect. The effect is called the illusory truth effect, i.e., if you repeat something for a long period of time, just because it's being repeated over and over, people will think that it is true, especially if it doesn't get contradicted over a long period of time. I've been in situations where girls get in danger because people believe that nonsense, and I'm talking about the world of fighting. You'd be surprised, a barely developed teenage boy is actually quite a match for an adult woman. That's the equivalent. I'm not saying a girl can't win, I'm just saying that the likeliness of a girl winning against a man, especially a trained man, is really low. Yes, of course, Clarissa Shields or Ronda Rousey will win against the news anchor who drinks a lot of soy latte. And honestly, if he takes things seriously, even then, he might actually have a chance. Jermaine Durandamy almost lost a boxing match to a 40 to 50-year-old news anchor who trained for at most 6 months. People remember her for knocking him out, but she was not in control in that fight, and the knockout was pretty lucky. The people who actually want women to fight men are the actual misogynists. And the problem is that this kind of nonsense actually gets into the mind of people, and you're going to get young women in danger, because yes, the peak woman might actually win against a man, but that's the peak woman, and she'd have to fight an average or most of the time below average man to get a chance to win. So what does that tell you for an average woman? The average woman will struggle against even the lowest level of fighter. It's not feasible for women. And now there's my greatest problem with this movie. It's that it's a bait and switch. There's another principle you need to know. It's called like by association, or the association fallacy. Basically, you want people to like something by introducing something else that they already know and already like. Companies do that all the time. You're going to have a woman on top of a beautiful red car. You put in proximity things that people like to create an association with something positive. It's been replicated not just in media but also in marketing, but experiments have been done with animals too. People often will have difficulty overcoming certain traumatic events because certain things will remind them of it. Think about a soldier who's going to have PTSD, is going to hear a loud noise and suddenly panic because that reminds him of an IED exploding. I was really looking forward to the release of Nobody 2. Nobody 1 is a movie that I really liked. It's a movie that I've watched multiple times with people. And Nobody 2 starts really well. And there's, a couple of warnings in the beginning. I should have seen it coming. But for the most part, the first 80% of that movie is pretty good. And then it completely derails in the end. And it's just nonsensical. I just hate it. I don't care that Disney wants to have its male audience back. What you need to understand is that these companies, it's not a matter of money. It's not a matter of marketing. It's a matter of changing behaviors, manipulating you, changing how humans operate. But the problem, like they said in that movie, is that you can't win against nature. You can have people say things, you can make them act in a certain way, but eventually if you make them eat shit, they'll just admit that no, shit doesn't taste good. It's terrible. You've probably seen it. Feminist woman says she wants to have a soft man, and then she gets a soft man and she's just disgusted. And then she goes out with Chad or Tyrone. There's aspects of your nature that you shouldn't fight against. because it's there for a reason. If you want to drink water, well, guess what? There's probably a good reason for that. You can't push and force behaviors. There needs to be some kind of environmental evolutionary pressure that forces people to change because it allows them to survive and adapt. You can't force them into liking things that will just inevitably cause their death. They're going to rebel. Even if they're going to take a lot of time to rebel and wait too long, they're still going to rebel. And you can see it. Disney doesn't fucking care about its male audience. Disney's just mad the brainwashing is not functioning. People are walking away in droves from nonsense like nobody too. People are finding their refuge in Korean, Chinese, and Japanese media because they don't have or have less of that nonsense. Japan is getting infected, but that's a story for another time.